Welcome to the Exchangors podcast,
covering the world of creative deal structuring,
financing,
value adds,
and income generation in real estate.
The Exchangors podcast with Dusty and Cary. And here we are, episode number 5 of the Exchangors podcast. Welcome, folks. So glad to have you here on board. This is Cary Crites and the co-host, Dusty Cady.
How's it going, Cary?
Another beautiful day. And what a good recording we just had, huh?
Great guest. Demay, Keller Realty. I mean, the guy has a wealth of knowledge. And I mean, some of the deep dives into his deals, like how he turned property he bought, had a lease option on it, got a piece of land out of it up in Washington, and then ended up getting, I think, a condo and then another property out of that. Just the stories are pretty amazing what he's been able to do.
Yeah, so often we find with these folks that just keep rolling assets and rolling what they have under their belt to be able to get into the next deal, and he exemplifies that 100%. So
absolutely shows that patience definitely can pay off. Some of the other things he talked about was a master lease option. I think people really get a kick out of that, just how it seems kind of simple once he broke it down. But again, you really need to help the seller understand what it is and how it's going to benefit them. And that's another big focus of his.
Yeah. And I think the last thing that he got into is also a program that he's building out, 40 ways to be able to sell your property, and just kind of in general, how to be thinking as a seller to be able to get buy-in, not only as a licensee, someone that's working on behalf of other clients, but also when you're trying to acquire properties on your own.
Yeah. He's trying to take it from the seller's point of view, like educate the seller, because selling a home could be scary. And I'm really excited to see what he comes up with that series.
There you go. It's Demay of Keller Realty out of Reno, Nevada. Jump into it. Here we go. Demay in the studio. Hello, sir. Welcome to the Exchanger podcast.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Cary.
Episode number 5 of the Exchanger podcast. And we're so glad to have you on board. Someone that's been in the Reno area, very active for a number of years. Mm-hmm. And just want to learn a little bit more about you and jump into it. First off, real estate. What were you doing before you got into real estate? What's your background?
Like a lot of real estate agents, I slung drinks and was in the restaurant business for a long time, and found myself in Reno back in 2000. Well, moved to the Reno area in 2000, and in 2005 was bartending, trying to figure out what I wanted to do next.
And where did you come from? Are you from Washington? Because I saw that you went to Seattle University.
Yeah. So, all right, here we go. So
the deep story.
Yeah. So
now.
I was born in Eureka, California, but I was about 6 months old and don't remember a thing. And then we moved to Minnesota. Still don't remember a thing. Ended up back in Seattle. Probably in the late, like 76, go Seahawks. And so I basically was there until the 4th grade, and then my parents moved us up to Anchorage, Alaska. So I was in Anchorage, Alaska from 81 to 89, which was 4th grade till I graduated high school. I wanted to go to the big city, so I moved to Seattle, lived in Seattle from 89 to 94. Mm-hmm. And that's where I went to Seattle University, put myself through school.
And what was your focus? What were you thinking you're going to get into?
I actually went to the Art Institute of Seattle because I really wanted to get involved in like fashion merchandising. I wanted to jump straight into the high-flying, super lucrative world of fashion.
I gotta say, you're looking dapper today, so it's paid off.
Well, the style is translating.
Yeah, well, back then I had 2 earrings and a fashionable mullet.
Well, that was during like the grunge scene in Seattle, right?
Yeah, I can tell you that when I moved there, and then my brother moved there 2 years after I did, and he. My brother was grunge before grunge was cool, so he played with a lot of those musicians and stuff like that, and it was just fun seeing the growth of Seattle at that time. I was a foot courier, and as a foot courier, I wasn't on a bicycle, and I was in this area called Belltown. And if anybody's been in Seattle, they know Belltown's like this cool, real hip area that's full of high rises. When I was walking through there, there wasn't a single high rise, and it was kind of ghetto land. Mm-hmm. And I always thought, man, it'd be cool if somebody did something with this. But I had no clue of what anything was about real estate. Yeah, I didn't know you could buy. I thought $100,000 house, you had to have $100,000. I knew nothing about real estate way back when. So anyway, was in Seattle, and then going to Seattle University, and they said I didn't turn in my loan paperwork. No. And so I'm like, well, I can't afford this.
For your studies.
For my study, for everything. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll go learn to snowboard. So I just moved to Tahoe in 93, 94, bartended there, and then left Tahoe, went to Kentucky for a while. My mom ended up, then moved back to Seattle and thought I'd go back to school again, got bored, figured I wanted to travel some more. So I worked on a cruise ship for two years, and we did the inside passage from Seattle to Alaska.
Amazing.
And the whole time, bartending basically got me where I wanted to go.
Yeah.
And then ended up in Oakland. They didn't rehire me, so I ended up in coming back to Tahoe as opposed to Seattle because I was tired of the traffic up in Seattle, and that was in 2000. Met a girl. We got married. At Zephyr Cove, so I was one of the boys at Zephyr Cove. And Cary, I know that you.
I know it well.
You steer boats out of there.
Yeah,
so.
Got the captain work as well.
Yeah. So that was in 2000. We migrated to Carson City, then ended up in Reno in 2004.
And all this time, are you still slinging drinks? Is this
pretty much? Yeah,
okay, gotcha.
The restaurant. But I actually helped a small startup company get started. It's called Informa Touch.
So these are the days of really executing on your customer service, really building that foundation for ultimately where you'd be today.
And communicate,
bartending, right?
Yeah, and truly
that's a great training ground right there.
And truly communicating with people. And I managed a place called Sam's Place up in Tahoe.
Sam's Place, no kidding.
Yeah,
been there.
You know Sam's Place.
Oh, yeah. Is it still a thing? It's not, right?
They've closed. They closed down. They called it Wally's. They closed down. It's called something else now. I don't get up there as often as I'd like to, but
sure. None of us do.
Yeah. So, but from there, and I also waited tables at a place called the Summit, and anybody who knows steakhouses, traditional steakhouses, the Summit was a pretty epic place up in Tahoe. So I guess that experience taught me how to talk to everybody about anything at any time, and we used to have literally the wealthiest people possibly in the area, if not maybe parts of the world, living near Sam's Place, and they'd sit at the bar right next to the guy who just got off work hammering nails, And so you just learn to treat everybody
unique place
the same.
in that regard.
It truly is. So how did you make the transition then from, bartending, slinging drinks, if you will, to real estate sounds kind of cool?
Yeah. So moved to Reno. And then didn't know what I was going to do. I wanted to open up a restaurant, but I didn't really have the financing behind that. And went to UNR to finish my degree, I guess is what you're supposed to do. And a friend invited me to a 12-week seminar on real estate. And I said, I really don't want to go and be sold something that I don't want. But we ended up going anyways. And it was kind of part of the same group, this Exchangors group. It was through Remcor Real Estate, and Maggie Bird was the broker. And the first day we went in there, she talked about over delivery. And I thought, I don't want to be backing up. I didn't want to be a real estate agent. Here, let me buy your house and sell you a house.
Yeah.
I wanted to add more value to what I could bring to the table. And when I went to this first class, I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I want to be a real estate agent.
Such an interesting way to start it off too, because we've actually, Dusty and I were talking about it. I think nearly everybody we've had on the show so far has had something to do with that Remcor day at some point. So incredibly unique to begin with.
Yeah.
And for the record, that's actually not by design that we've got all these folks in here.
It just happens to be that people are successful in Reno, have gone through some sort of
and this kind of
training.
Like this petri dish of creative thinkers and kind of going outside of the box in a world where that wasn't the case and still isn't really across the board. But to start off that course with over delivery, with bringing value to the clients and bringing value to the market in general, kind of an interesting approach that would be the way to go instead of trying to just entice you with dollar bills like so many other folks do.
Pretty much. But, the other part of it too was that it was enticing because of dollar bills, and you hear about these big transactions and how they could get in with no money down or do different things, or finding the benefits of what the clients are looking for. So, that's what Exchangors talk about a lot, is the benefits the clients are looking for. The challenge to that is, 95% of all real estate agents do 95% of the same thing. They do, they're buying and selling houses with either cash, conventional loan, FHA loan, VA loan, or they're getting commercial loans. So thinking outside the box is difficult. So we almost had kind of and this is just my opinion, all exchangers may not feel the same way, but I believe that there was a disconnect between how we were trying to do real estate and how the rest of the world was doing real estate.
Yeah.
And so, there was a lot of friction with that. And so within the exchange world, we all had a good time and we all did deals together, but trying to educate everyone else on what we were doing was a challenge.
And so you're talking, I would imagine, specifically to the other agents that are resistant to other forms of financing, other forms of deal making, that you just couldn't break through from them. Would you say that that's the biggest point of challenge?
And it was, I think that the banks control everything right now. I mean, they do. They control if you have good credit or bad credit, how much they're going to lend you. There's only one thing that really drives the price of real estate, and this is what I learned a long time ago, was financing, right? Period. If something costs, if right now, tomorrow, no one could ever get a loan from a bank, first-time home buyers don't have $300,000. First-time home buyers might have $20,000, and that's what the market would have to respond to if anybody ever wanted to sell a house in the future. So the financing makes it tricky.
Sure. Yeah. So I want to touch a little bit back on the friction piece, because I feel like you guys felt it back then, but it's still out there. There's the people who are in your world, or the world that we're talking to, who are thinking creatively and trying to do deals in a different way. But like you said, 95% of the real estate agents are educating 99% of the public on how you're supposed to do real estate. So the challenge, I guess, is when you do find those agents who aren't receptive to that, or even those sellers that aren't receptive to that, that becomes tough, because they haven't thought about thinking outside of the box. So I think one thing that we've tried to think of is how do we change that with those real estate agents and with those sellers? Do you have some good tactics on that?
Well, I think it starts with acknowledging the difference. So sometimes people would say, well, gosh, that's a real estate agent, and, they've been doing it for 20 years and they've just been doing the same things over and over again. Well, I can go in and do that transaction 15 different ways. So therefore, I'm smarter than you. Well, I think that mentality has to change, and it has to change on both sides. The top producing, especially the top producing brokers and real estate agents in town, they close 20, 30 deals a month, and they do the same thing and they have the same routine. I respect that beyond all else. And so for anybody to say they're doing it the wrong way, they're not really paying close attention. It may not be as fun, or maybe it is fun for them, but everybody's got different personalities.
Yeah.
And so my thought is to say, hey, I respect what you do. Maybe if I come to you with an idea, you'd be open to it. And it's about educating.
Yeah.
And I guess kind of segueing into what I've been working on, what I was just telling you about before the podcast started, was taking things strictly from the seller side. We talk about, you can go to so many classes, how to buy with no money down, how to do this with no money down, but everything is taught on the buyer side. The challenge is when you go to the seller and you get a deal done, right? And if you got a deal done, it almost kind of could feel a little dirty. If like, hey, I got this one, no money down, and all right, so I caught him in a bad situation, and I'm a cash buyer and I picked it up for $50,000, and look, I can sell it tomorrow for $150,000. In the creative world, there's so many ways to accomplish similar things.
Yeah.
And everybody's taught how to do it from the buyer side, but there's no education to the sellers. So I'm working on this 40 ways to sell a house, and it starts from the seller's perspective. What does it mean? What does it mean to sell to a cash buyer? What are they really looking for? What does it mean to sell to a conventional buyer? Advantages and disadvantages. FHH buyer, VA buyer. So that's the one I just wrapped up. The next one will be like, well, how do you sell to a 1031 exchange?
Yeah.
And so if you have a resource where you as a seller can, in a couple of minutes, understand that 1031 exchange is not the most complicated transaction, and you as a seller really have little to worry about, and you're probably better off selling to somebody who is coming in with a 1031 exchange. Or as seller financing, seller carry, whatever you call it.
Yep.
Nobody wants to do it because the agents are like, why would you do that? What's the benefit of that? Well, I just learned a term not too long ago. It's an annuity. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Why would you not want an annuity? You have a $400,000 house.
Yeah.
And if somebody's going to give you $50,000 and they're going to pay you 6%,
Yep.
you can't find an annuity to pay that much.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the agents on the other side are uneducated and they're like, oh, well, what if you have to foreclose? What if they ruin the house? What if it goes down? Okay.
Down payment plus payments along
Yeah,
the
you
way.
get the house back.
You get the house back. And so the $10,000, well, I don't want to deal with the foreclosure. Well, those are worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
But I don't know too many people who have done owner carries that have found themselves in a bad situation in the long term.
Right.
And it's just the benefits are tremendous.
Well, and in so many other cases, they're generally getting top dollar, if not a premium, for the same property. You know, you see these properties generally that are offered for seller carry on the MLS. Typically, one of the reasons they're doing it is because if you comp it out, they're so wildly overpriced, no one else is going to be interested in it any other way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. However, if the numbers work, the numbers work, right?
Yeah.
They do. I mean, there's people out there who have businesses and have tons of income, and they can't even get a car loan because they don't play by the books. Even though, why would you not trust this person to pay you? I mean, quite frankly, I think a lot of people who are creative are kind of fiscally more wise, but the banks don't like that. So
Yeah.
Sure. I think that's really neat. What we're talking about is educating the sellers coming from their point of view. I've struggled myself reaching out to buyers to explain seller carry. I think so by maybe having a better viewpoint, maybe looking at it as if I were the seller and what would be the benefits to me, and maybe look at it in that way. It might help me explain that it truly is a win-win for everybody.
I think so. You said you were reaching out to buyers to explain
to
that?
sellers.
Okay,
I'm sorry. Yeah,
okay,
to sellers. Yeah.
Clarify. I heard that correctly. Yeah. So that's the big part of it. So, so I'd say the biggest disconnect with exchanging is the fact that not everybody is educated, and how do you educate everybody without making them think, oh my gosh, I don't understand what you're talking about. And why I got 3 buyers over here that are just going to do a traditional deal. Well,
Well, and for agents, especially if they have a lot of business going on their side, in many cases, they don't want to take the time on the side to try to figure these other things out when they have another 5-10 people throwing cash at them. Cash offers are minimal stakes on hand, to be able to pick up the property.
Yeah.
Things will change, of course, as the market changes, if it does and how it does and all that. Then, of course, people won't be able to offload properties anywhere near as easy. So it's good to be able to have all these strategies on hand and ready to roll when the time comes.
I'd agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the education piece, that's why we're here. We want to get the word out that there is other ways to look at real estate and hopefully start to open up people's, their playbook and really give them a lot of different ways they can go about it. That being said, let's talk about an interesting deal that you've done in the exchange world.
Yeah. So I've been trying to change my language a little bit. So, I'm going to call it, I don't even know, a sale. I went to a training, a Dale Carnegie training, and I was talking about transactions and deals and pitching, and they're like, that sounds scary. So
it's not a contract, it's an agreement.
And so how do we put these agreements together, or how do we close a sale? So I'm just by changing the language, I'm hoping I can ease into a couple of other people's, conscience, if you will.
Makes sense.
So, like most exchangers who have what they have, they've got stories of what they have done themselves, because it takes many opportunities to come up, with a sale transaction. Let's just call it an exchange, because I think that's. Let me back up, and that's one point that I'm trying to get across: is every sale, every transaction, every deal is nothing more than an exchange. And that's what the exchangers talk about. So let's just talk about what we would normally consider a cash sale. We'll see if I can do this time.
Yeah.
So we think of a buyer as a pile of cash and a seller as a house, right? So the buyer's trying to buy the house with their cash. Well, you can flip the role, and you can actually call the person with the house the buyer, and they're trying to use their house to buy the pile of cash.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So if you go into every transaction deal with the knowledge that this is nothing more than an exchange, then you can really talk about what each side wants out of the deal, out of the sale, out of the transaction. Okay, I'll use transaction. So, yeah. So
it's an okay word.
Yeah. So I currently own a condo right now, and the condo took several steps to get to, and it's kind of, you'll hear similar stories with Exchangors. So, back in 2004, when everybody could get a loan for breathing in the mirror, I qualified for one of those, and bought a house out in Elko, and we bought it for $85,000.
Elko being Elko,
Nevada.
Northern Nevada.
Yeah, Northern Nevada. Sorry about that. So, at that time, an $85,000 house was renting for $850 a month.
Ooh.
And that, yeah.
These numbers.
Where
right
did these
there.
days go?
Yeah.
And those were numbers that existed before I got into real estate. So, but after talking to a lot of old timers, they were like, that's the rule of thumb, easy.
Yeah.
If you get something for $100,000 and rents for $1,000 a month, you're golden. So we went out there, bought that house with maybe an 80-15-5 loan or something. So we only had to come out of pocket like maybe $10,000. Of course, that money came from the first house I ever bought in 2004, which we bought for $190,000. A year later, it was worth $280,000.
Out in this area?
Yeah, here in Reno, here in the Reno area.
So you used the equity from the first house to buy this Elko house.
I mean, I was a real estate genius, right? I mean, I bought a house and made $100,000 and didn't do anything. But
that
real
was
estate's so easy.
That was I'm a genius, and
Dude.
actually everybody in Reno was a genius at the time. So and Sparks as well. So we refied, pulled some money out, had some money there, and decided to go buy this house. Well, one of the Elko's a 4-hour drive from Reno, and I did not want. The benefit I was looking for was I wanted to hold this house for a while, but I didn't want to deal with management as much. I wanted whoever was my tenant to take care of the house. So a lease option is what I thought would make the most sense. Whoever's going to come into this house, they're going to put some money down, and they're eventually going to be buying this house. So they're going to take great care of the house.
Yeah.
And so advertised the lease option, had somebody come in and they gave me a few $1,000s as option consideration. One of the best advices I got from a mentor of mine was like, you treat your tenants like they are gold.
Yeah.
If they need something, you try to respond right away.
Sure.
And if you do that, they're going to respect you if anything ever goes wrong. Well, I had the first tenant, after a year and a half, she's like, I can't qualify. I'm going to move back in with, I think, her family. And so I'm like, well, she's like, I know I don't get the option consideration back.
What was the terms on that deal for that option? Was it a 2-year, 1 year?
She couldn't exercise the option, I believe. I'm going to kind of make up some numbers because it was a while ago, but it was probably, she could not exercise the option less than 2 years because I didn't want to have to pay, or it was at least a year for the capital gains.
Right. Yep.
We set a price, let's say we set a price of $100,000, and if it appraised for $110,000, she got $5,000 and I got $5,000.
Okay.
On top of if I bought it for $85,000, she'll buy it at $100,000. So from $85,000 to $100,000 is mine to keep, right?
Yep.
And then if it appraises over that by whatever amount, we split that equity.
Gotcha.
So
now at this point, just for clarification, when she would go and get a loan, she doesn't have to come up with a down payment per se. She would just go get a loan for $100,000 at this point, or how does that?
So she would need to qualify for a loan on her own. However, she could use the equity, and then we also put in their rent back equity. So maybe her rent was $1,100 a month, but I was giving her $200 a month towards her down payment.
Okay.
And so as long as the contract reflected that, the banks would recognize and accept that.
So if she's in there for a year in that example, she's put down $2,400 as a down payment.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Awesome.
And the good lenders recognize that, and all the lenders I've dealt with have recognized that. So she basically defaulted, but she called me up and said, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And I was like, okay. So I did it again to another person, and they couldn't exercise on it. So I did it a third time. And then by the third time, it was a long ways to go out there. And I decided, I really want to sell the property. And the tenant at the time, the lease optionee, he was like, Chris, I don't see it happening. And I went, is there anything else that you have? Do you have any other real estate that I can take as a down payment? And he goes,
30 chickens.
Yeah, there's some sheep or goats or boats. And he goes, well, I actually inherited a piece of land up outside of Seattle.
Okay, now we're talking.
Whoa, there we go.
And I went, okay, all right. And at that time, my interest rate on my loan had went down. It was a goofy during the short sales and everything that you see back there. Found out they reduced my loan to like 3.5%. So I was like, score. Well, I said, well, let me do some research on that land. So I called an agent up in the Seattle area, and I said, what would I need if I need to sell this in 30 days? What would I need to sell it for? And she said $30,000, $30,000. I was like, cool, I'm down with that.
Yeah.
So I went back to the tenant and I said, hey, how about if we do? I'll take your land as a down payment.
Yep.
Right. And then I will what we call wrap the loan, which means I had the loan underneath, and I still have a hard time explaining to people how to do that.
So were you wrapping his property? Was there a balance on that?
No, he inherited it, but he hadn't paid his taxes in 3 years, and it was just a vacant piece of land with a bunch of trees on it.
Yep.
I said, I'll take the land as a down payment.
Yep.
And we're going to wrap the loan. So I kept my loan in place where my payments were maybe $650 a month. And he was paying me $1,100 for the lease option, and even at a 10% interest rate or a 9% interest rate, his payments went down to like $900 a month. So the win for him was that I took over this land that he was doing nothing with.
Right, probably never would have until it was repossessed on a tax sale.
Something like that, very very possibly. And then his payments went from $1,100 to $900. Now I still got a little bit of a cash flow in there, and additionally. This was at the time when they were trying to recover the market, so they were giving first-time home buyer tax credits, and so he was able to buy the house. And I even took a step further and had an attorney who said you should do a trust. Put the property into a trust, and then you can give him the beneficiary benefits of that trust. So I was learning something new and willing to try it all. So we structured it in kind of a funky way, but basically it was a wrap. And so at the end of the day, he got a $6,000 tax credit.
Yep.
His payments went from $1,100 to $900, and I kept the cash flow. Well, so
for what duration of time were you keeping the cash flow?
I probably had that for 2 years, maybe.
Because it was my understanding that he exercised his option at that moment, how did you keep yourself in the mix if he already had exercised? Or maybe I'm missing a point.
So he actually owned, so I now own, so I took the land, so I now own the land. So at the end of the deal, so he exercises his option.
Yep.
He's taking the option, and it's going from a lease option scenario to, I am now buying the house, so I'm giving Chris the down payment in the form of the land, and he's doing seller financing now.
Yes.
So he didn't go to the bank to get the loan.
He didn't need to go to the bank to get the loan, and so anytime in the future, he could have, when he was capable, he could have went and just refinanced and paid me all off whenever he wanted to.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, he now owns the property. I did seller financing, and he's off of the land, and so.
And I'm sorry, how long did it take for him to pay you off and get out of the mix? Or are you still working that loan?
So he, several years later, maybe 5 or 6 years later, he called up, and all of a sudden the payments weren't being made. I'm like, where are you? And so we got in touch, and he's like, man, I can't. He's like, we're moving, and I need out of this. And I looked at it, and I ended up doing really well on the deal. So I actually paid him, wrote him a check for $15,000 and bought the house back from him.
For 15.
For 15, and
so you got like 4 paydays out of that,
right?
right?
Yeah. Well, and then that, and kind of the thing that surprised me was, so I had the land and I went up to Seattle, which was great because I got to see my friends and eat at my favorite restaurants and got to write it all off. That was the best part.
Nice.
And I paid the taxes off. We got that all cleared up. And then I called the agent, and she said, we should list this thing for $119,000. And I went, what?
The land?
The land.
Like from 30?
I was like, wow. Okay. All right. That sounds
ambitious,
amazing.
But sure.
Yeah, sure. So we listed at that, and then we just kept dropping the prices. Long story short is after about a year or two, I think we sold it for $60,000.
Still doubling up.
And so then I had that $60,000.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I, for myself personally, did a 1031 exchange. So I took that money and bought a condo in Reno, and we picked up that condo for like $45,000.
You know, for all the luck that you had out there in Elko, I would have thought you would have picked up a second condo up there.
Well,
double down on Elko.
You know, Elko, as my mentor told me, he says it can be a boom or bust town, and it was just too far away, and I was the market had tanked, and I was doing, you know, I was just super busy with, you know, life and kids and all that kind of fun stuff. So so ended up with that condo, and it bottom of the market, so it appreciated like hotcakes. And I actually used the equity in that condo to do a different deal where I wanted someone to do seller financing for me, but I didn't want it attached to that house. So I said, here, we're going to write a deal, and you're going to carry back $30,000, but I'm going to secure it on this condo, which at the time was maybe worth $90,000 or $100,000. So they were secure on that. So
if you were to default on that loan, they didn't have any recourse to take the house back. It was only to take back your condo.
My condo, which was still worth $90,000.
Sure.
You know,
still like fine for them if that was the case.
Yeah, because it'd go to the courthouse steps, and someone would pay $50,000 for it, and I'd still get the money back if I were to ever default. But
in a situation like that, when you use, say, your condo as collateral for another loan or for another whatever you're working on, do you write them in on a second? How do you do that to where, like, what is the process of using that as collateral?
It's basically taking a loan out. So, you know, on a regular transaction, you have a note and a deed of trust that you pay the bank, right?
Yep.
On a seller carry, the bank doesn't have that. The seller holds the note and deed of trust. Well, instead of the deed of trust being secured on the house they sold, I just saying, here's a different house to secure it on. So there's a note and a deed of trust that's created, and then escrow files it all.
There you go.
And you know, their money, it's secure that way.
So do you just work with title when there's, you know, seemingly a more complicated transaction than most? Do you just go to your title company, whoever it is, him or her, and say, hey, this is what we're doing, and they put it all together? Or do you have to actually go to like an attorney and say, we need to draw up this paperwork?
So I will say that you should always use an attorney.
Disclaimer.
Discllaimer.
And we are not attorneys.
Yeah, we are not attorneys. However, I have done, you know, I mean, I've been doing this for 14 years now, and I don't think I think I've used an attorney once, because a lot of the forms cover it. We're not supposed to practice law. But, you know, as I'm jumping back into commercial more and more, a lot of people like to use attorneys to cover themselves with many things. So to answer your question, if you know what you're doing, and Exchangors very rarely will ever use attorneys, because we understand what we're doing and we're able to explain it. And
title's just on board. You tell them, you know, this is how this transaction is going to work, and they just write up the paperwork.
Yeah, and there are definitely more experienced title officer or escrow officers that know what to do, and they are worth their weight in gold because they keep me out of trouble.
How would you recommend that people that are needing such title officers would find them?
Honestly, call me. I mean, because you know there's several good ones in town that have been around, but you want somebody that's been doing this for 20 or 30 years, and ideally, if they remember wraps. If they remember when interest rates are 12 and 18%, they're the ones who know how to get it done.
Gotcha.
So, you know, there's several, you know, I've been using First Centennial a lot lately. And so, you know, Suzanne Haskins is an escrow officer over there that has been around a long time. She does transactions for Jim Keller, Maggie Bird from Remcor gives a lot of credit to Jim Keller for teaching her what she knows, and he doesn't tell you a thing unless you sit down and chat with him in his office. So
he's an interesting character.
Yes.
And you know, he's come up again, another personality that's come up in pretty much every episode as well.
Yeah, we're hoping to get him in here at some point.
And you know what? That's one thing we didn't bring up. So you actually work with Keller Realty under Jim Keller.
Yes.
And this is a gentleman that's been in the game for 50 plus years. Mm-hmm. He has a long, long track record of not only traditional, but also creative means of pulling things off. What's it like for you working under someone like him that has so many years of experience and continuing to work with him.
It's really cool. And I should probably clarify because a lot of people get a little confused when I say Keller Realty. And I always have to say it's Keller Realty, not Keller Williams. And
Right.
And my broker, Jim Keller, he opened his office in 1964, got his license in 1962. He's 84 years old. He still comes to the office every single day.
An amazing guy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Very, very routine. Always thinking outside the box. I just talked to him yesterday, and he was telling me how he sold the same place 7 times and did he did a land lease on which buildings were built. He did a 55-year land lease, and he laughed yesterday. He's like, "You'd think that's a really long time until you live long enough to see it expire." So he's got like 2 expiring.
Wow.
Anyway, so that's why I went over to Keller Realty when I left Remcor, was because I was like, this guy really knows his stuff.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And the genius is, at Remcor we did a lot of paragraphs of addendums to protect ourselves, and that's what and the other agents wouldn't like. They're like, I don't understand this, and I'm not going to recommend it for my client because we don't want to have to hire. I don't want to have to hire an attorney to
decipher
decipher it, right? And so when I went over to Jim's property, when I went over to Keller Realty, I wrote one of the offers as I had been originally kind of trained and thought I was doing CYA all over the place. And he looked at it, he goes, "Do you want them to throw this away or just reject it?" And he goes, "Give me that pen." And he took what I had 3 paragraphs and turned it into 3 sentences. So that's the other thing about creative real estate is we tend to make things sometimes more difficult. And if we can think about making it super simple, I think we get more people on board. So actually, having access to him is tremendous.
Well, let's take a quick little break and we'll come back with Chris Demay of Keller Realty.
All right, so welcome back to the Exchanger podcast here with my co-host Cary Crites. And in the studio today, we have Chris Demay talking about his experience in the real estate game. So Chris, one big thing I wanted to get into, we touched on a little bit so far, is lease options and some more unique ways around that. And you brought up something called a master lease option.
Yeah, so you associate a lease option with a lease, right, on a house. Let's talk about a house. So someone has a house, and I'm going to lease option it, which means I'm going to pay rent, and then I have an option to purchase it in the future, speaking from the buyer side. Well, let's say I had 3 houses. And so if I had 3 houses and the same person wanted to do a lease option on all of them, most people would say you have 3 lease options, right? 3 separate ones. I have one for 123 Main Street and 444 Main Street and 666 Main Street. Let's call it 777 Main Street. So, so a master lease option would say, okay, I tell you what I'm going to do. Instead of paying you $500 and $500 and $500 a month on the lease part of this, I'm just going to do a master lease option. So I'm just going to pay you $1,500 a month and have the option to buy all of those together. Okay. So it's grouping a bunch of real estate into one specific lease option. Well, where it can become really beneficial and make a lot of sense is, I had a client that was looking at a mobile home park, actually, and he was a mobile home park operator, and I found an off-market deal, and the rents weren't there. Let's say there was 100 spaces in this mobile home park, and there was 30 vacant spaces. But because he operates mobile homes, he knew that he could fill those spaces, and for every space that he filled, the value of the property goes up. Well, he didn't want to go to the bank, his financiers, and say, "Listen, I have this mobile home park that has 70 spaces," because they're going to say, "What is your income?" And he'll say, for example, the net income maybe was plucking a number, $200,000 a year. Well, the bank's going to say, okay, well, $200,000 based on a 5 cap means it's worth, pick a number, $5 million. Well, he wanted to say, I think I can get those spaces up. So let's call it 200. I know if I get those 30 spaces, or even if I get 20 out of 30 vacant ones filled, I can make my $200,000 number now $250,000, picking numbers up.
So now the property would be worth more.
Considerably more, right.
And did he need to do that because the owner of the seller was his number higher than, let's say, the $5 million that you're referring to?
Yeah. So the seller had a number that they wanted to sell it for, and he was like, well, I think we can get it there pretty easily. So what he wanted to do was control the property, use his expertise and his management to fill those spaces up, and his lender only required him to have 6 months of proven income. So we wrote a master lease option. So rather than having 70 lease options on these spaces for these mobile homes,
Yep.
he said, listen, I'm just going to give you guys, picking a number, $100,000 or $15,000 a month.
Okay.
And I manage everything.
Yeah.
And if I make any money, I'm keeping it. If everything over $15,000, here's your 15. If I lose money, I lose money. If I make money, I keep it. But what that allowed him to do was control the property without having to buy the property. And then he had the option consideration. So, he said, here's $500,000, and I now have the option to buy this property at the $5 million or whatever they negotiated on. So that allows... The master lease option allows somebody who really knows their business to run their business. The seller is secured in a way because they have non-refundable money. Worst case scenario for the seller in that transaction or scenario is they have $100,000 in their pocket, and the buyer says, I can't option on the property. Well, they don't have to go through a foreclosure process to get it back. They just say, hey, you were a tenant. You're defaulting on your loans, or you didn't exercise your option when you're supposed to, so now you get the property back. So that's a huge benefit for the seller. And the seller also gets the benefit of getting closer to their asking price because the buyer knows how to operate that kind of a commercial property.
Yeah, you have a situation, just to recap, so you got a situation where a seller is looking to put their property up. The interested buyer is not able to qualify for the funding, or at least isn't able to get it valued at the price that they want it. So you set up this situation where he could go in and be essentially the property manager or the manager of the operations there, so that he could get it fully operating at its largest capacity or potential, and therefore be able to qualify for the funding he needs to be able to wrap it around and own the property in its entirety.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So the master lease option is a really cool tool.
And you said it was in that particular cases, you think it was like there was a down payment of about $100,000. So there was something considerable at the beginning that got the seller interested.
Yeah. So, if it was a $4 million deal, I think there was $500,000 put down and released, when some of the due diligence paperwork was done up front, then that was released non-refundable to the sellers. And the buyer was very savvy and knew what he was doing. And we ended up
trusted himself and being able to come in and turn things around there.
Yeah, exactly.
And he probably recouped some of that, I'm guessing, when he went to get his actual loan on the property.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the story continued, and the market went down a lot, and we had it was an interesting scenario. Let's just say that in the Exchangors world, I keep saying Exchangors world. Me personally, I dive into things to the nth degree till I can't figure something out. And I learned a lot about how the Wall Street, what's the movie, The Big Short?
Yeah.
A lot of us who are part of this original REMCOR group and moved over to Keller's office, we were always interested in how the markets were working. Literally before that big last crash, I remember meetings and John Spinola saying, I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't know how this is going to continue. It makes no sense. Everybody's getting loans, and they're starting off with mortgages of $1,700, and then when their 1.2 interest introductory reverse amortized loan goes to 3%, it still seems like a low interest rate, but their payment just went from $1,700 to $2,500.
Yeah.
And so I remember we went to a Bank of America presentation, and it was mostly Exchangors there, and they explained exactly how it all worked with the loans being split off and subprimes and things being insured by the big companies or the insurance companies, and how they were bailed out. So we kind of all knew that, but we couldn't believe that it actually happened, and nobody expected the cliff to fall that far off.
So you guys were a little bit ahead of the curve, and just looking, just sort of, I guess, logically taking a step back, like, hey, if someone's paying $1,700 and their loan, goes up by 30%, it's going to be tough for people to keep up that payment.
Yeah. And I was so it just made sense that the market was going to crash, but nobody saw it crash that hard. And, I think the biggest difference between the market then and the market now, number one, you have to qualify. It is kind of interesting that you're seeing 3.5% down conventional loans, which means that banks are now offering those and they're not backed by the government. So, I personally think that Reno's in a pretty unique situation. It's crazy to see the pricing of houses right now, but there's so many projects going on.
What did you find yourself doing during the downturn, just in brief, to be able to weather the storm? And especially being around a lot of the people that you had that had so many years of experience, what were some techniques or different things that you were focusing on that kept you afloat when so many others in the market, 80, 90% of people bouncing out?
Yeah. I took the mentality that I was going to learn everything that I can about a transaction or a client or part of the real estate business. And I ended up doing a lot of short sales. And I would take short sales I remember being on the phone, talking to somebody literally on the other side of the world, on hold for 3 hours. And I'd say, finally they'd pick up the phone and I'd say, "Did you get this paperwork?" And they'd say, "No, we don't have it anywhere. You need to fax it back in again."
Fly out to Thailand to drop it off again.
And so it was just grinding away and really working hard for my clients and trying to really, really learn something new. I learned about a tranche, like how backwards Wall Street is. I had this one lady, we went in a contract. It was a short sale. And part of the short sale process for anybody that wasn't involved with it is you list the house, you get an offer on it. Let's say they owed, $500,000. Let's say they owed $450 on it, but the market literally was $295. Well, you got an offer for $295, and whatever that balance was, let's call it, was that $100,000? Yeah. So
give or take.
Well, yeah, $450, $150,000. You need to go get the bank's approval to sell the house for less than full value, and the benefits to that were that at the time, still kind of is, in order for you to qualify for a loan in the future for FHA, you could have a short sale 2 to 3 years ago, and if it was a foreclosure, it was 7 years ago. So if you had a foreclosure, you could not basically get a loan for 7 years. So So people are like, "Listen, I'm upside down. I can't afford my payments, or I'm moving, or pick your excuse." So you'd have to talk to the bank and negotiate with the bank. And sometimes you're negotiating with the bank and you're like, "Well, will you guys authorize this?" And the banks would say no.
Yeah.
You're like, "Why would you say no?" And no one could give us an answer. And so this one particular client, I got her loan number. I ended up talking to somebody probably on the 63rd floor of Wall Street in downtown Manhattan. And I said, "I'm trying to find this one particular loan and I just want to talk to somebody." And they said, "Well, it's in this tranche." I'm like, "What's a tranche?" They're like, "It's just a big pile of money. Here's the tranche number." So she gave me a tranche number. I looked up this tranche number, talked to somebody, and they basically were like, no one could give me an answer. No one could tell me why they would not approve a short sale. That tranche was the note holder. So they just wouldn't accept it. And that was one of the times I told my client, I'm like,
didn't work out.
I'm gonna recommend you foreclose, because she did not need her credit. She already had another house that she was moving into. She was retiring in that house. There was no reason to keep her credit score up. So that was one of the few times I advised foreclosure, because the bank wasn't going to release her from liability on that.
So in general, just to kind of summarize the short sale aspect, if someone owes more than their house is worth, they want to sell it, there's an offer on the table for $100,000 less than what they owe. You need to go to the bank and get their approval. And the bank, their incentive generally is to write off the bad debt that they have. If they're going to have to foreclose, is it easier for them to go through the short sale process as a bank?
Well, I think that what happened back then is a lot of those loans were insured. Well, the insurance policy basically probably says something like, if this house is foreclosed on, we will make sure that you get the rest of your money. they say nothing about short sales or selling it short of what is owed on the property. So I think that's literally what was happening. Is they're like, well, we're insured on it if it's foreclosed, and so I think the government actually finally got involved, and banks came around, and banking, like, well, do we have time for one more fun little one?
Sure.
Yeah, fire away.
Okay. So while I was on a personal level, I was dealing with his house. Spent a year trying to get them to reduce the loan or work with me on the loan, and they just had nothing to do with it. And I actually had 2 properties, but we're kind of getting ready to go down this path of starting to miss payments, because at that time the banks wouldn't even talk to you unless you started missing payments. It was such a
strategy,
such a disaster. Well, an exchanger in our group one time, he said, "Hey, listen, there's a local bank that has a house for sale. They took it back in foreclosure, and it's listed." Well, it was a house up in Stead, and it was listed for $240,000. Well, this is when literally 1 out of 3 houses was vacant up in Stead,
Nevada.
Stead, Nevada.
That's
Sorry,
it's
kind of the suburb that's just north of Reno, or north of Reno. And he presented it, and I didn't really think about it. And then we came to another Exchangors meeting, and he said, "Hey, here it is again." Well, by then, my wife and I, ex-wife, had decided that we were going to start missing payments, and we were willing to screw our credit up because it was just ridiculous. We owed way too much money on that house. And he said, just give the bank a performing note. They had a $240,000 note that they foreclosed on. Now they have this house. Just give them a $240,000 asset. Give the bank their price and write your terms. So I was like, well, what the heck? I $240,000, 100% financing. So they're going to do 100% financing on it. I'm going to do 2% interest only for the first 5 years, 4% for the next 5 years, and then it amortizes for 30 years at no more than 5%, and the loan is assumable, and I can also substitute collateral, which means I can, like we talked about earlier with that condo, I can do that with this particular loan. And they accepted the offer. And I went, wow. And so I was home, and and Kristen walked in the door, and I'm like, I wrote an offer on a house, and it's in Stead. And she's like, I really don't want to live up in Stead. And I said, let's just take a look at it. Well, it was a 2,200 square foot house. We're pregnant with her second child, and we're like, she's like, okay, what's the property worth? Like, have you run comps on it? I'm like, nope, and I don't want to. So she goes, so what are our payments again? I said, well, with taxes and insurance. She said, yeah, and I go, $560 a month for the first 5 years on a 2,200 square foot house.
Sold.
Not bad.
Yeah. So what were the benefits that both sides were like? Oh, and then a week later, I'm at the office. I'm like, I am going to run comps. I'm like, oh, $160,000 is like what the market value was, but I paid $240,000 because it was the benefits, right?
Yeah,
I paid no money out of pocket, and so the benefit to us was that we went. No money down, low payments. We're never going to pay off this loan because it's a fantastic loan. And the bank got a $240,000 performing note. If the big banks had played ball that way, I mean, maybe the housing would be through the roof right now, but we saw that onslaught of foreclosures.
So you got into this new property. What did you do with the house you were actually in? Did you guys end up getting foreclosed on that one?
No, well, there was actually 2 houses we were working with. One was our personal residence. The other was a rental. And we short sold the house that we lived in. And then the other one, we tried to short sale, and we ended up getting foreclosed on that. But we super quickly, I think we listed it for $85,000. We got an offer for $65,000. Went to Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae said, nope, we need $65,000. $65,000, and we were in contract for $55,000. And so Fannie Mae said, nope, we want $65,000. And the buyer said, well, we'll get an FHA appraisal. So they got an appraisal, came in at $55,000. FHA said, nope, we still want $62,500. At the time, I didn't have two nickels to rub together. And so I was like, screw it. I'm no more energy. In retrospect, I can tell you that if you can avoid foreclosure, do, because your hands are strapped for 7 years getting any conventional financing. And foreclosed, went back on the market. They listed it at $85,000. Eventually sold it off the market for $42,500. So that just shows you how smart that big business was. Yeah. Anyway, I think that answers that question.
Before we get out of here, there's one other thing I wanted to touch on. You mentioned that you're a specialist in listings, right?
Right.
You're listing specialist.
Yes.
That's the term. Can you touch on a little bit about how you decided to focus on being a listing specialist, and then how you end up finding your clients?
Sure. Well, that's kind of the magic, is most people want to find listings, and how do you find them? So it's a lot of contact with people, a lot of trying to find the benefits, trying to compete with all the other agents out there saying, hey, listen, there are some major benefits beyond just planting your sign and putting it on the MLS. There's ways that it should show better and you take better pictures. I have actually a 30-day marketing plan, and my goal is to get you offers within 30 days. And I think at least the last 10 residential listings, I've succeeded in doing that. And that included properties that were in probate, which most agents are very scared of even touching. So taking the view of the seller's side of the transactions has really helped me focus on how to communicate, and I think help spread the education of creative real estate, because the sellers don't know what's happening. No. The buyers understand it, but the sellers don't. So it's helping me put on that hat, if you will.
Yeah, well, and to your point, what we talked about earlier, not only is it the sellers themselves that don't know much of what's going on, because this might be the only property that they've purchased, but then the expert in the room, being their realtor or whoever is representing them, if such a person exists, very often doesn't even know what could be done here.
Yeah.
Tell us about this. So what is this that you're crafting? You were talking about something to work with the sellers to educate both the sellers and their realtors.
Well, it's the I think I touched on it earlier. I can't remember if I did, but 40 ways to sell your house. So it's a whiteboard videography that I've been putting together, and each segment will touch on it helps you to get offers quicker. It helps you understand how the sales process works, who has what at the end of the deal, and the pros and cons of each types of sale as well. So I'm working on that. It should be posted to my website probably, so where are we at? Mid-February. So
about the time that the podcast comes out.
Yeah. So demayrealestate.com, DEMAY, realestate.com will get you to the Keller website, which is where it'll be. And then you can also find me on Facebook as well. So I expect to have links there when I'm...
That's great. I mean, a super admirable project. In general, just putting out information that, the average seller of their home, like Cary just touched on, it could be the first time they've ever sold a house. And that could be scary. And again, you're listening to everything your realtor says, but it's also nice to go out and get some of your own education, and if it's out there and available, that's a really cool thing.
That's the goal, and you guys are right on board with that. You guys took the lead. You've been doing this longer than I was working on my 40 ways, so commends to you guys as well.
Yeah, no, it's such a pleasure having you on board. Thanks for your time and for bringing your experience out here to the microphone and to anybody that's listening. Looking forward to being in touch and get you on again.
Right on.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye.
All right, thank you.
Disclaimer. The information expressed in this podcast are for education and general information purposes only and do not constitute accounting, legal, tax, or other professional advice. Listeners should not act upon the content of this information found here without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other qualified professional. The opinions expressed may or may not be shared by the production team, guests, or advertisers. As always, cheers to your success in all of your money generation endeavors.